From what should honestly be called a fairly lackluster campfire chat to a pretty insane amount of patch notes coming in the mid-season patch for Season 6, we got a deluge of insane buffs to the Necromancer. Not only that, some bug fixes that I've been reporting now for a very long time that have finally gone in, that have taken completely obscure builds, Blight Necromancer, bumping it all the way up to potentially the S tier with more than doubling its damage output. It is that crazy. And I'm going to make this video a little bit different than I normally would. You know me, I like to talk, and I obviously am going to have a spreadsheet as well, but what I'm going to do is just cut to the quick. I'm going to start off with quite literally every single build, how strong it got, and how many more pit tiers I think it's going to clear based off of the math that I've done. After that, I'm going to go through the actual changes from the patch notes in a bit more detail for the nerds who appreciate that level of detail. But if you walk away from this part of the video with everything that you needed, right before you leave, if you're new here, subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video as well, it helps me out a ton, and if you wouldn't mind clicking the bell notification icon, I promise I don't spam you, I'm not going to be perpetually inundating you with like posts and all of that. You just don't want to miss out on any of these videos. And if you appreciated this more direct version of my types of videos, let me know down in the comments. You all ultimately shape the type of content that I make in the way that I go about making it. So the more feedback that you can give me in a constructive manner, the better that I can service the needs that you have. Let's just go ahead and talk about the numbers, the brass tacks here. Starting off with all of our darkness builds, and I kind of tried to do them in order. There's just some new ones here that we'll have to talk about. The big thing here is Sever. Sever is gaining anywhere between a 40 to 47% damage increase, depending on what power of Reaping Lotus aspect that you personally had, and somewhere between a 40 to 47% damage increase, along with some overpower changes, is going to represent anywhere between like 2 to 4 additional pit tier levels. So I just cut in the middle about 3+ tiers here. Right now, Sever can already clear realistically tier 105 with a bit of fishing on my overpower version. If you haven't checked that out, see my most recent video about Sever. It's absolutely disgusting. Talking about Blight, probably the biggest change here. They made so that Ebon Piercer actually doubles the amount of bolts cast when Blight casts twice. So we're looking at a 2.25, a 125% increase in damage, more than straight up doubling all of its damage. And this is going to take Blight and bumping up anywhere around 10+ pit tiers, which, considering it's already clearing around tier 90 and probably a bit higher with better gear, means that's going to be firmly in the tier 100+ range, something that it has not been able to break through the entirety of this season. Infinimist is getting a little bit of love here, basically just a single item being changed along with a little bit of passive damage increase, and what we're looking at is a 41% damage increase, and that's going to be representative of, again, about 3+ pit tiers here. Blood Wave, most notably the Shadow Blood Wave version here on max roll, is getting somewhere around a 25% damage increase, which should represent between 1 to 2 pit tiers, maybe a little bit more with perfect gear. Soul Rift build basically got the exact same swath of buffs that the Blood Wave build got. So this is an overpower, shadow damage, proccing build with Unmaker. Again, another 25% damage increase here, somewhere around 2+ pit tiers. Now you see we have OP Bonestorm here. That's right, don't let your memes be dreams. OP Bonestorm is something that I used to try to work around in Season 2 with the blood boiling vampiric power, and with the addition of the rune words as well as being able to buff its initial damage, similar to how Soul Rift is currently being built, they went and buffed the base damage of Bonestorm itself. And what this is representative is more than doubling its total damage output, almost tripling it. So we're looking at 171% damage increase on the skill. I'm not quite sure what pit tier this thing will end up clearing at. It's definitely nowhere near Soul Rift's damage output, but it's pretty damn close at this point. So I'm definitely going to be putting this together when the patch goes live. And obviously, because Bone Spirit is our best build, and every single season and every single patch, they just kind of like almost accidentally continue to buff this thing. This actually got more than a 36% damage increase, which is again representative of another 2 to 3 pit tiers here, which is going to get it firmly into the 120 range, the first Necromancer build that's going to be able to accomplish that. Spirit Wave got slightly less buffs than Bone Spirit did, only because it can't overpower, but this is another 23% damage increase, around 2+ pit tiers here. Shattered Spirit, do you remember the off-brand version of Bone Spirit that got really popular because it was just significantly easier to run? Well, it turns out that there was a whole aspect called adaptability that just didn't work for it, which is 100% damage multiplier, which should now work for the skill. What this means is that Shattered Spirit might actually be like a fairly competitive build after it basically lost all of its popularity because it was just straight up bargain bin version of Bone Spirit. This is another thing that we're going to have to put together, but this build gained something close to like 300% bonus damage. Bone Spear is going to be a little hard to calculate just how much more powerful it got. They basically supremely buffed the Deathless Visage effect, but realistically, Bone Spear hasn't really been shining for at least a couple seasons now. I'm just roughly estimating that's going to gain around 60% damage, and it'll probably bump up 4+ pit tiers from what it's currently doing. Bloodlance and Blood Surge both got a minor buff just because they have increased overpower damage when you're very specifically using Subo. So this will probably end up netting them about 1 additional tier. Now that being said, they are both currently in the S tier and have both cleared tier 110 on the pit already. So I don't expect them to go significantly higher than that, but they got a little bit of a bone here. And then minions, this one's really hard to calculate. Basically, there was a bug where Mendeln would reset across all of your minions if you summoned a new minion. So if any of your minions had died, if your mercenary had reinforced recently, it would just basically lose you 1 Mendeln circuit. So if you're already like 5 hits in and then you lost it, you'd have to go all the way back around. It was a pretty significant DPS loss, but it was just really hard to calculate. So minions will be an amount stronger. I don't know how to calculate that one. But there you go. There are all the builds. I've already touched on some of the buffs that are coming, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into the significantly more like nuanced and nitty-gritty version of this update. So if that's all you wanted, again, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a like, leave a comment if you appreciated this, and let me send you on your way. Go discuss the various pit tiers, whether or not I'm right or wrong, whether or not the tier list will be updated properly. Again, just scream at me down in the comments. I appreciate y'all. Let's get into the details. The first buff coming to us is from Subo, our boy Subo. Basically, they buffed the vast majority of the various mercenary abilities, but the one that we're looking at in particular is Bargaining Chips. Bargaining Chips is going to modify Subo's explosive charge, which says that he will throw 4 charges that can all stick to random enemies. Technically speaking, they can all stick to a single boss. And one of the options for it was that when you were to overpower against a target that had an explosive charge on it, you would deal increased overpower damage. And not only that, you could actually trigger this 3 times. So whereas previously, if all 4 of them were on a boss, you get an 8% damage increase, you'll now get a 20% damage increase. Already talked about adaptability. Adaptability will now work for basic skills, even when you don't cast them. There is a chance that this will also work with Pain Gorgers. I'm not exactly sure how that and this aspect have interacted in the past, but the long and short of it is the only basic skill build that the Necromancer actually has, even though they have buffed all the basic skills damage, they have. Not as much as I think that they need to. In fact, I have a ton of feedback about how to revolutionize the basic skills. Look forward to a video coming out somewhere around near the end of this season here. But Shattered Spirit, casting bone splinters in a big rig around you is our only real basic skill build. So adaptability is purely going to increase this one here. On top of that, they just straight up buffed bone splinters damage from 9% per splinter up to 15% per splinter. This does increase Shattered Spirit's damage though. Big Bone Storm change here. Bone Storm pretty crazy, all things considered. If you didn't know, Bone Storm was kind of left in the dust when they made it so that we could have additional ranks to our ultimates. It always did 180% of its damage over a duration. So it wasn't, like per damage instance, it was over a duration. So it was fairly watered down, but now it's going to be doing 300% damage. Not only that, that means that its scaling obviously goes up since it scales off the base. Each rank will get you an additional 30%. So up at 5 skill ranks, it's going to be doing 420 nice percent damage. And the cool part about Bone Storm is that there are so many pieces of gear that just straight up give you bone skill ranks. From the original base that it was up to this new base that it is, it's a 66% damage increase. They just buffed Avulsion and Compound Fracture. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure why. My base thought was that this was to attempt to answer the issues that Bone Spear runs into for whatever reason, which is that it just doesn't really have enough damage scaling. I think the base skill needed its damage scaling increased, not these. But because Avulsion and Compound Fracture are run on Bone Spirit, are run on Spirit Wave, are going to be run on OP Bone Spirit, are going to be run on Shattered Spirit, etc., even just regular Bone Spear itself are all going to enjoy a fairly massive increase in damage. They also buffed Gloom to a pretty insane level here. Gloom gives you 2% damage per rank. So if you get all the way up to 10 ranks, that's 20% damage. And it used to stack 3 times, and now it stacks 4 times. So it goes from a 60% damage multi all the way up to an 80% damage multi. 1.8 divided by 1.6 is how you end up with this 12.5% damage increase. Overpower Sever is not going to be able to enjoy a benefit from this since it has to use Banished Lord's Talisman, but Base Sever will. Obviously Blight will. Basically like Shadow Bloodwave uses this as well. They buffed the base damage of Shadow Blight, so as opposed to a 44% damage tick, it's a 60% 20% damage tick. Just straight up devs, hey, if you're watching, Shadowblight just needs to be completely overhauled. I know that you all already understand that. I appreciate the damage buff here. Make it a lucky hit chance effect, make it scale damage over time, give it an identity for dot damage, considering Affliction already like serves the purpose of just being strictly better than Shadowblight. That being said, they buffed it. We got to see if it does enough. It's not going to, but it's a fairly sizable increase. They buffed Reaping Lotus, and it's not even just that like they buffed the crap out of Reaping Lotus. They buffed it to the absolute moon. Reaping Lotus used to do 110 to 170% weapon damage, and if you put it on a two-hander, it does 340% weapon damage, meaning that it was a 3.4 times multiplier of Sever's damage, on top of the fact that it also like summons the additional Reapers that then all do that same amount of damage, so it's significantly larger than that. But the base damage increase that you're going to see is that much. They made it so that the minimum now rolls at 140% and it goes all the way up to 200. But that alone is a full pit tier. Like just straight up doing nothing else, you will clear one pit tier higher than you were before just from this change. They changed how Deathless Visage is going to track your damage. So basically before the explosions, the echoes from Deathless Visage would gain 5% multiplicative bonus for every 30 additive crit damage that you have. And since this reads your character sheet, you can manipulate this in a lot of interesting ways. So if you had 300 additive critical strike damage, just as an example, that used to get you a 50% damage multiplier, and instead will now get you a 75% damage multiplier. It's a 50% increase in damage. They also buffed Howl from Below. It used to be a 50% damage multi, now it's a 90% damage multi, so a 1.9 versus a 1.5. Sadly, Howl from Below kind of sucks on Infinimist because monsters then run outside of the range of your corpse explosion, so you lose out on a ton of damage. But this amount of damage makes it significantly better on something like a boss. So it's definitely a sizable increase. Again, maybe like 1 to 2 pit tiers here. Now this is the motherload of changes here. Ebon Piercer just straight up is going to double Blight's damage. Now this is something that we were all reporting as early as when Ebon Piercer initially was launched, because it has a very interesting stat on it that does absolutely nothing, most notably chance for a Blight to cast twice. Now, since Ebon Piercer spawns 4 bolts when you cast Blight, you would think that if you cast Blight twice, it would spawn 8 bolts, but it just didn't. Now, I had gone back and forth with the developers on this a lot. I have even again recently reported it in this season because I'm like, hey, if it says cast twice, it needs to trigger twice, because why else would it say cast? Like, yes, you get 1 more projectile, so it's slightly different for lucky hit chance, etc. But the Blight bolts themselves don't do any damage on Blight. I can't stress that enough. It's only the amulet, and quite literally, the amulet just doubled its damage output. This is 10 plus tiers in the pit, a full tier on the tier list up just from this change. You're going to see a lot of people running Blight all of a sudden, and I'm going to be amongst them. And just for the people who want to see all the numbers tabulated together before looking at this, that's how I got to the calculations for how many pit tiers are going to be clearing, the relative change in the tier list structure, etc. So I'm excited to test out all these different things. As long as they all work and my math is spot on, you should see some movement in the tier list on max roll. Obviously, I'll be covering this as more people are playing the builds and reporting what pit tiers are clearing, etc. There's even a universe where some of these things outperform what I initially thought. Oh, and I completely forgot. They also buffed Mortarcrux, and I put that into KEKW Mortarcrux because the item doesn't do anything. I'm sorry, devs. Mortarcrux is a cool item. It really is. It's a cool concept. It doesn't matter what you buff it to. It doesn't do anything. I wish it was a focus, or Black River was a focus. Maybe that's one of the options you could go with. But there you go. That's the long and short of it. If you appreciated the first part and you actually watched all the way through to here, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. That's like a wild amount of patience. I know I talk a little bit too much, but hopefully you got some good stuff out of it. Or if you just appreciated that nuance, let me know down in the comments. Fight against those people who say we got to have shorter videos. If you're here for the long haul, if I'm helping to fill up your lunch break or drive home, or you're on the train, just listen to me yap. Again, I appreciate you being here so much, but thank you for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps, and I look forward to seeing you all after the mid-season patch goes live. That's going to be on this upcoming Tuesday from this video's date.